in the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. Many people know the Greek myth of Daedalus and his son, Icarus. His father, who was a celebrated carpenter and inventor, was imprisoned by the king Minos of Crete in a tower with his son. To plan an escape, Daedalus fashioned wings that could soar into the heavens. He gathered feathers and bound them together with wax, and then he gave them to his son. He warned his son not to fly too low to the water, as the humidity would weigh down the wings and he would crash into the water. Conversely, he instructed his son that flying too high to the sun would cause the wax to melt. Icarus, soaring through the air, became overwhelmed by the experience, rising higher and higher. As he touched the sun, his wings burned up, and Icarus crashed into the sea and drowned. The myth is meant to teach us a lesson that human creativity, which is like the gods, needs to be coupled with a sense of propriety and limits. The immature pride, the hubris, was the cause of his own death. While there is an ocean of difference between pagan Greek myth and our Torah, often cross-cultural comparisons can be enlightening. Interestingly, the very hubris that motivated Icarus's downfall is reflected in a very different way in this week's Parashat, in a story which has troubled many. In our Parashat, we learn of the untimely and tragic death of two priests, two of Aaron's own sons, Nadav and Abihu. On the 8th day of the dedication of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, they experience a divine flame that descends from heaven and consumes the sacrifices upon the altar. The divine presence is symbolically occupying the tabernacle at this moment. This must have been a moment unlike any that they had ever experienced in their entire life. Overwhelmed and in a state of religious ecstasy, Nadav and Abihu give an Eshara, a strange offering of fire not commanded by God in the Torah. Like Icarus, who wanted to approach the sun, the actions of the two priests seem generally motivated by an intense desire to connect to God. Yet the Torah tells us that instead of the sacrifice being accepted, they became the sacrifice itself, being consumed by the heavenly flames. Both the Greek and biblical narrative are meant for us to consider the notion of self-knowledge and human limitation. We need to be aware of the difference between our finite existence and the divine existence, and to respect boundaries. Great crimes are committed when we forget that the other is truly the other, whether it be in a relationship between two people or between mortals and the divine. However, I would like to focus on a different aspect of the story, something which I believe is a challenge for us moderns. Whether it is the Bible or Greek myth, for the story to be powerful, we must not only focus on the limits of humanity, but the divinity of humanity as well. Indeed, the names of our priests, Nadav and Abihu, their names curiously mean to give tribute to, and he is my father. They point to the fact that they feel within themselves a divinity beyond themselves. They want to give homage to that sense of the divine that resides within themselves. Humanity is made from the dust of the earth, but as we know, we are also in the image of God. Like one chord of an instrument that resonates with the vibration of another chord, the human being is a spiritual creature in a physical body. We too can respond to the spiritual resonances all around us if we attune ourselves. And here's the problem in our modern society. In both stories, individuals are tempted not with wealth, not with power, not with money, but with spiritual connection and transcendence. These resonances are so strong that they cause the protagonists to lose their own lives in the process. In our modern society, which is becoming increasingly secular and filled with the cacophony of deafening distractions, I don't think that the temptations of Nadav and Abihu are really concerns at all. We do not need to fear being burnt by the sun like Icarus. Many simply cannot relate to these spiritual and religious passions, and it is for this reason that the failings of Nadav and Abihu seem so strange to us. The fire offering that they gave is indeed an Eish Zarah, a strange fire, not in the sense that it was an offering not commanded by God, but that they felt compelled to do this in the first place. In the words of Wordsworth, the world is too much with us. When we speak about success in our society, it generally relates to the notion of material success, as opposed to a life well lived. Our education system is often perceived as utilitarian, as opposed to a path towards self-knowledge and wisdom. We are focused more on achieving marketable skills than asking compelling questions about the world in which we live. Questions which can propel us to a lifelong search for meaning. For our generation, the danger is not getting too close to the sun, but too close to the water, in such a way that our spiritual wings are burdened down and we cannot fly at all. It may be true that modern Jews have difficulty understanding the technicalities of sacrifice in our parshiot, but much more problematic, I believe, is the failure for us to understand the psychology that motivates people who wanted to bring a sacrifice in the first place. The mind of a person who wants to bring a sacrifice felt the presence of God in their lives, and they needed to respond somehow. It was this mindset that led Nadav and Avihu to lose themselves, so blinded by their love to connect. Our Jewish community is rich and multifaceted, and we know that there are many gateways to Jewish identity, many avenues. Yet I fear very much that we will lose the next generation if we do not instill within them a spiritual passion to transcend. Many years ago, the former host of NBC's Meet the Press, David Gregory, addressed the Miami Jewish community at an event talking about his journey of faith. Gregory, the child of intermarried parents and himself married to someone not Jewish, began in adulthood to explore his faith and began to learn Torah more seriously. I remember Gregory saying something that for some in the crowd was very uncomfortable to hear, yet I believe that there was a lot of truth. He said that ultimately a Jewish identity, which was to survive in a multicultural America, needed depth. And that meant a serious engagement with Jewish learning and Jewish texts. National Jewish pride in the state of Israel and standing up to anti-Semitism was not a substitute for personal spiritual commitments. One needed to chart a Jewish path leading towards a higher meaning and understanding of self. For someone whose family life and history reflects the American experience, I think his words were particularly significant. For these were not words of a rabbi looking down from atop a pulpit, but the words of one who some people might consider somewhat assimilated, someone not so different than many in our Jewish community. Our generation is not the generation that should fear the sin of Nadav and Avihu. Quite the contrary. Our challenge today is to instill within our people the passion to embark on spiritual journeys. And the challenge does not begin with engaging others. It begins with engaging ourselves. Nadav and Avihu brought a strange fire not commanded by God, and this was their failing. Yet, that was their greatness as well, as they both understood more than any other people present at that moment that they stood before God and wanted to bring something of themselves. Can we feel the same sentiment, and can we respond? That is the challenge of our time. Shabbat Shalom.